I am going to wrap up now by introducing the moderator for today's panel, and not standing directly in front of her while I do it. Angie Kim is the author of the national bestseller Miracle Creek, named a Best Book of the Year by Time and Amazon, a Washington Post bestseller and summer read pick, a top 10 Apple Books debut of the year. Kim is one of Variety magazine's 10 storytellers to watch, and has written for Vogue, the New York Times, Washington Post, Glamour, Salon, Slate. She moved from Seoul, Korea to Baltimore as a preteen and attended Stanford University and Harvard Law School, where she was an editor of the Harvard Law Review. A former trial lawyer. I worked for a lawyer too and can still never say that word. She now lives in Northern Virginia with her husband and 3 sons and is at work on her next novel. You've had so many recent, you've a good updated bio, because some of these things, like the Kirkus Best Book of 2019, the Time 100 Best Books of 2019, an Amazon Best Book of 2019, a Book of the Month, Book of the Year Award finalist, is that what it is? Something, yeah. So, and that was like within the last week, all those accolades came down. And so I'm going to hand off now because I am not worthy. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Zach. I love being here because this is where I got my start. This is, the Writer Center is where 9 years ago, when I had no experience writing whatsoever, I came here and took some workshops, and that's how I met my writing group, which is meeting right after this session. I'm so excited to be back, and I'm so excited to be here with these 3 lovely ladies, and I'm so excited to talk about all the things that we're going to talk about. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with my introduction, and just to mix it up a little bit so you guys don't have to hear me sort of talk about these 3 ladies like on and on and on for 10 minutes, why don't I do a quick introduction of each person and ask you to do an introduction of your book and tell us a little bit about it so that we have a context for the rest of the discussion. So I'm going to go in order of the seating. Cheryl Head, who's right here, has spent 20 years in public television and radio before turning to fiction writing. Her first book, Long Way Home, a World War II novel, a story of black soldiers' experience in America's segregated army, is a 2015 Next Generation Indie Book Award finalist in the African American Literature and Historical Fiction categories. Cheryl writes the Charlie Mack Motown series. The first in the series, Bury Me When I'm Dead, is a 2017 Lambda Literary Awards finalist. The other books are Wake Me When It's Over, Catch Me When I'm Falling, and Judge Me When I'm Wrong. Cheryl is also the Director of Inclusion at the Golden Crown Literary Society, whose mission is to increase the visibility of lesbian-themed literature. She was named to the 2019 Hall of Fame of the Saints and Sinners LGBTQ Literary Festival. She resides in an 1870 row house on a diverse street in Washington, D.C.'s Capitol Hill. Okay, a little bit about her latest book, and then I'm going to ask you to sort of summarize that for us. Book Riot says that Head's, this is a quote, Head's novels crack with the sharp dialogue and noirish characters we've come to expect from the best detective novels. But Charlie Mack gives readers just enough new to make the familiar still feel fresh. And the Washington City paper says, the hard-boiled detective has been a tried and true mystery novel trope since the mid-20th century. So it's probably a sign of the times that local mystery writer Cheryl Head depicts a quite different gumshoe heroine. Aside from breaking the white male mold, Private Eye Charlie Mack is an African-American and a lesbian. She is, above all, empathic. Would you tell us a little bit about your novel?
Sure. Book 4 is called Judge Me When I'm Wrong. Just a little context for the series. Charlie Mack and her diverse team of private investigators work out of Detroit in the mid-2000s, when Detroit was really at a low point in its trajectory. It's a good time to write about murder and mayhem. So in Judge Me When I'm Wrong, which was inspired by my grand jury duty I did here in D.C. a couple years ago, where I found profound information for writing books, which is a confidential process, but I would run home at night and write down everything I heard. And then, so for 18 months, I couldn't talk about it. In the 19th month, I wrote this book. It looks at 2 cases. Charlie has been picked for jury duty. And so she's pulling away from her investigation and is assigning the work of a case that involves grand jury to her other teammates. And the two trials converge, and there's mischief afoot and mayhem that really impacts both her personal and professional life.
Thank you. Okay, so next, Vanessa. Vanessa Lillie is originally from Oklahoma, but she calls Providence, Rhode Island home with her husband and dinosaur aficionado son. Smitten with a small estate, she enjoys organizing book events and literary happenings around town. Her debut thriller, Little Voices, received star reviews from Publishers Weekly and Library Journal, as well as must-read lists in Real Simple, Refinery 29, Cosmopolitan UK, and Bookish. Her next book, For the Best, will be released in September 2020. She has a deadline for that coming up this Friday, so she was telling us she's been so we need to ask her lots and lots of questions about that one. About Little Voices, though, the Providence Journal said, with her debut novel, Little Voices, Vanessa Lillie has arrived on the American literary scene with a flash of brilliance. Aficionados of mystery, thriller, and horror will savor this intricately plotted page-turner that builds to a stunning denouement. No word of a lie. I literally jumped when I reached the reveal. This was no cheesy Deus Machina, but rather a breathtaking and logical, if unanticipated, close to this treasure of a book. So can you tell us a little bit about Little Voices?
Yes, so Little Voices is a story of a woman who, on the night she goes into emergency labor and almost dies, her friend is murdered. And so back home from the hospital, she's reeling postpartum, actually hearing voices, which is a condition with certain types of postpartum depression. And she finds out that not only has her friend's murder not been solved, but another friend has been accused of it. And so she must return to some of her skills she had as a prosecutor in DC, actually, and try to solve the case in her postpartum state. So it's the story that I really wrote as a new mom myself, who wanted to put all of these big, complicated feelings I was having postpartum into my favorite genre, which is thrillers.
Well, thank you. And then finally, Tara. Tara Laskowski is the award-winning author of the debut suspense novel One Night Gone and two short story collections, Modern Manners for Your Inner Demons, which is actually my choice of gift for my writing group, and Bystanders. Her Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine story, The Case of the Vanishing Professor, won the 2019 Agatha Award, and her Ellery Queen's mystery magazine story, States of Matter, was selected by Amy Hempel for the 2017 Best Small Fictions Anthology. Tara was the winner of the 2010 Santa Fe Writers Project's Literary Awards Prize, was the longtime editor of the popular online flash fiction journal Smoke Long Quarterly, and is a member of Sisters in Crime and Mystery Writers of America. All right, so about One Night Gone. Tana French said of her debut novel, One Night Gone's strength lies in its all-pervading sense of precariousness. Everything is fragile, unstable, and under threat. It makes for a subtly but relentlessly unsettling book. Crime Read said, One Night Gone heralds a lyrical new voice in the world of Gothic storytelling and suspense. And in a starred review, Publishers Weekly notes that, quote, at the heart of this intriguing thriller lies a disturbing awareness of society's inclination to view women as disposable, and calls it an evocative and beautifully crafted tale of suspense. So I'm really, really excited to welcome all three of you to this panel, and we figured that we would talk a little bit about the books, certainly, but also about publication journeys and things like that. And if there's anything in particular that we will have a Q&A at the end, but if there's anything else in particular that you guys would like us to focus on, feel free to raise your hand at any time. Okay.
Angie, should I?
Oh, I'm sorry. I completely forgot. I'm so sorry. Yes,
okay.
Yeah. I'm failing
wanna know?
already. Oh my God. Okay.
All right. After all that. So One Night Gone is a cold case mystery, essentially. And it's set in a fictitious beach town of Opal Beach, which is on the Jersey Shore. And my main character, Allison, who's in her early 40s, she comes to the town as a way to kind of escape and regroup. She's just been divorced. She's lost her job. She's living with her sister in this small apartment in Philadelphia. And she gets a chance to house sit at this like gorgeous oceanfront house in Opal Beach. And so she takes that opportunity. And while she's there, she's talking to some of the locals, and she hears the story about this teenage girl who went missing from the town about 30 years before. And the disturbing thing to her is that she feels like no one cares what has happened to this girl. And so she takes it upon herself to kind of figure out, like, is there something going on? Like, she feels like maybe something suspicious has happened, and so she becomes this sort of amateur sleuth. And the story is told from 2 points of view. So you get Allison during like the creepy beach winter season in the present day, and then you have Maureen, who's a teenager in the 1980s during like the height of Jersey Shore summer. So.
All right, so there is, I read all 3 books this week because my memory is just not what it used to be. And I wanted to sort of remember every detail of what I knew I would love about all of these books. And I'm so just enthralled with all of them. The one thing that really stood out to me as having a common thread for all 3 of you is the strong female protagonist. And not only do they take the lead in investigating and sort of solving the mystery or the crime, but related to that, you all chose women to highlight who are experts in areas that aren't usually thought of as traditionally female. So whether it be, heading up your own PI firm and, not only being a PI, but actually managing other people who used to be, cops and whatever, as well as being somebody who is the science of meteorology is somebody who is in your novel, Tara, and then the complex financial and legal problem solving that comes that's really at the heart of the case, that's at the mystery in your novel, Vanessa. So I just wanted to ask you guys, was this an intentional choice? Like, did you sort of think to yourself, okay, this is the kind of thing that I want to highlight and I want to have? Talk a little bit about that.
Okay. So for me, the 2 things. One, I definitely knew that I did not want an unreliable narrator. Because at the time when I was writing it, all of these unreliable women narrators were very popular. And it was like, the mystery or what the readers reveal was that, the main character is an alcoholic and can't remember things, or is, having some kind of psychotic break or something. And for me, I wanted to make sure that my character was reliable the whole time, even though something terrible had happened to her. Like, I didn't want the whole, like, reason for her to be investigating this to be, just because she had this horrible thing happen to her. It had to be like, that was like sort of her, I guess, initial push into it, but I wanted her to, be, I guess, of her sound mind the entire time. And so there was that, and then I was also trying to figure out, like, because I knew that I was obsessed at the time with the idea of, like, social media shaming, and how it ruins people's lives. Like, these things happen online and explode, and I wanted that to have happened to her, but I wasn't sure exactly, like, what it was. And at first it was this, like, I had this idea of, like, this, maybe it was like this video that some person had just, like, caught her in a bad act and, like, had gone viral. And then I had heard a story about one of our local TV anchor women who'd gotten drunk at a bar and, like, this was like news story about this woman, and I was like, oh, wait a minute, maybe a television news reporter, like, she could do that. But there's so many books out there where it's like a journalist investigating a crime. And so then I decided, okay, I'll make her a meteorologist. Like, she was on TV, and so she has this opportunity to have had this, like, public shaming kind of thing as part of her profession, but she wouldn't necessarily be, like, an automatic, I'm a journalist, I'm investigating this story.
But what I loved about that particular public shaming thing is that it was something that she did herself. Like she
Right.
did it on the air and she chose to do it herself. And it was actually sort of empowering. And a lot of people came out of the woodwork calling her a feminist and heralding her for it, which I thought was really great. And I also love that, you know, she is a scientist and that just the relation to weather, because I feel
Right.
like weather is such a huge theme in your novel as well.
Right, and that was an opportunity I had to, because I got to write about the weather, but it actually fit the character as opposed to just being
Because
the
that's
character.
one of those tropes they tell
Never
you.
write about the
Don't write about the
Right.
weather. Don't start with the weather. Yeah.
So like my whole research for this book, I like spent an afternoon Googling like weather maps and things to like sound smart during like one paragraph. That was like my research for her, but yeah, that worked out really well. That she was focused on weather, because the beach and like the winter beach, it's like perfect mood. So I felt like I could do that.
Okay. Cheryl?
Well, yes, I intentionally set out to write a really badass private investigator. She's a type A personality, and she's owned a business and a karate school. She's got a black belt. She's an attorney. She was former Homeland Security. I mean, it almost sounds like she wouldn't exist. But in Detroit, there are women like that who do exist. And I think in a lot of those of you who know how cities work, there are lots of times they're the men in the front, but they're this whole row of women who really get the stuff done. So I think Detroit is very typical of that. And so this is the kind of woman who can manage the complex stew of race and politics and class that exists in Detroit and lots of other cities like Baltimore.
And I also, so I wrote this right after I had my son, and so most of my brain, most of the time was spent thinking about like diapers, which is not a bad thing, but like how many ounces did he eat today? Did we poop today? Do we need prune juice? Like all of that was where my brain was. So I was just dying to hang out with someone who was like really smart and like not thinking about diapers, though my character has to a little bit. But the idea with her background is she did some prosecution work in DC, but she also did some financial crimes. But really, I was watching a lot of Scandal and Olivia Pope, and I love a fixer. And I know maybe it's like a little cliche now, but I don't care, because I think Olivia Pope is the best. So I kind of imagine like an Olivia Pope in Providence. You know, she was like, you know, she could get things done and break a few eggs, and kind of a little morally ambiguous at times, which is important for me as a reader. I just like a character who can surprise you. So I knew the crime would be complicated, and so I just tried to create a protagonist who could solve that crime and also just seem sort of a little bit the opposite of where I was. And I wanted to research how you track data, and spreadsheets can be almost like reading DNA at times, and the financial crimes is such an interesting area. And I also have a very good friend who's an accountant, so I made her kind of a type A like her, because you just have to have a precision to your brain. And so I liked all of those qualities kind of gelling.
And I really liked how she, a lot of the male characters were sort of underestimating her because of what they saw with, you know, her newborn and things like that.
Absolutely.
And at the same time, then all of a sudden, she sort of comes and she says, you know, blah, 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 blah. And she rattles off all these numbers and sort of logic. And then you sort of see, you know, both from the reader's perspective and from the male characters' perspectives, everybody's sort of doing like oh, wow, there's more to this woman, which I really love. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the new motherhood piece really plays into that too, because I think all our characters, there's an expectation when someone walks in the room, and so I think what I was thinking about was, well, what do you expect with a new mom? And this idea that she did have a whole life before she was a mother, and she had a whole career and many careers and experiences, but for some reason there can be a perception or a stigma that all of those things just go away, and you're just only, so I wanted to really play into those assumptions that even as a mom, I think, I still probably have some of those, that wiring in my brain to make assumptions too. So I tried to push on that.
Yeah, definitely. And Cheryl, for yours, one of the two trials or cases that comes together, which I really loved how they sort of, you went back and forth between the sort of trial that's happening with Cheryl Mack and then sort of the case that she has to hand off to somebody else who, you know, we see is very up to the task, but And that case fascinated me because it really does play into the whole Me Too era thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that and sort of how that goes? Just because I think it's fascinating. I think we'll all get a lot out of it.
Well, I guess I was thinking about the Me Too movement, and so the grand jury trial is a trial that looks at a campus rape at a fictional college in Upper Michigan, and one of the young men, father and mother, a prestigious judge, and his wife hire the Charlie Mack firm to basically exonerate their son, who doesn't want to roll on his other fraternity members, and so it's this is where the class stuff comes in, really. The judge is a prestigious black judge. He can't fathom that his son would be involved in something like this. But during the trajectory of the book and the rollout of the case, we find that he's vulnerable because he's closeted young gay man and doesn't want his father, the prestigious judge, to know. He would rather go to jail and all that kind of stuff. So at the end, he does the right thing. Spoiler alert. At the end, he does the right thing. But I was kind of fascinated about how that can happen still. That's an old story, but there are still, to this day, so many misdeeds at fraternity parties and things like that. I wanted to write about that.
Yeah, that's great. I really, and one thing that so Miracle Creek is my first novel, and I'm completely new to the publishing world. And one thing that really sort of surprised me a little bit is how the crime writing world, more than sort of some of the other genres, to me feels a little bit like, not that there's anything wrong with white males, but it feels a little white male. It really does. I mean, like the traditional sort of what we have seen as the classics in the genre have like, the cops or the PIs or the lawyers, and they're mostly white men. And I recently had a fascinating discussion with some of the women who are sort of veteran writers in this genre, and how the people that they see who are women who are strong in these areas of fighting crime and being lawyers and investigators and things like that, actually are people who are written by the people who are women themselves, or who are black themselves, or Asian, or whatever it is. And so I thought that was really interesting, and I wonder, two of you, these are your debut novels, you have been in this for a while, and would love to hear your thoughts about that, and what you think about sort of the publishing world and reception from the community.
I have a lot to say about this. I mean, I write a private investigator because I'm really interested in kind of the classic trope of the private investigator. And I wanted my Charlie Mack character to have some of those characteristics, and yet as a woman and as a lesbian, that she would be bringing some slightly new characteristics to the role. I mean, I really enjoy Dashiell Hammett and Raymond Chandler and all those kinds of things. And I want to give a shout out to Mark Bergen, who writes a similar white male guy who I like, who writes a police detective series. So I welcome that genre. I still love it very much. I write about Detroit, and Elmore Leonard writes about Detroit, and some of the stuff makes me cringe when I look at it now, but I still love the writing. So I think what I'm hoping is that the crime community, that is a lot male and a lot white and a lot old, and very similar to the public broadcasting where I came from. So I'm kind of used to those characteristics. I'm really hoping it'll embrace and open its arms to new writers of color and of difference, and the women writers who are out there. Because I think we have some good things to bring, and I think we still admire the genre, but we can add some nuance to it. I mean, let me just one more thing. So there, L.A., Raymond Chandler's writing about that, but so is Walter Mosley. And so is Naomi Hirahara, and
Steph Cha, who just wrote about the Korean riot and African American riots. Yeah.
So isn't it wonderful as a reader to be able to have those various perspectives of this, this benchmark city in our country, at a time both historically and contemporarily. I think that's good.
this is my debut, so I've just started going to writing conferences. I go to Thriller Fest. I've just been to that one twice. So this is like the idea is a bunch of writers come into town, authors, readers. And it used to be, as I understand it, it was mostly white men. And the panels were mostly white men. And that is who the editors were buying, mostly white men. And the editors are mostly white men, right? It's a system. And then, thanks to money and Gone Girl and Gillian Flynn, bless her, editors and people at these conferences started looking around and saying, oh, this can make money, okay. And so it's been really interesting, just even in the past couple years, most panels have at least a white woman. That's another issue too. There are more women, but it's, I believe, a very predominantly white women right now.
Especially in the psychological thriller genre,
Especially,
absolutely.
Yes. And so there's still miles to go, but it is encouraging that editors are acquiring books from women more and more, and that publishing is recognizing that it doesn't just have to be the way it always was, and hopefully putting more voices forward than just kind of the traditional ones, because there are lots of stories to tell, and people want to see themselves reflected in books. I mean, for this book, I wrote it because I was a new mom, and I was just like dying to read a new mom at the heart of a thriller. That's truly the impetus for this whole thing. I thought, oh God, wouldn't it be cool if she was like struggling but also solving crimes? I wanted to see a new mom in it, and I think it's so important for people to be able to see themselves in the books and not just have to always see a white male at the center of their stories, because that is not their experience, and it's important that we put those stories forward.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have that much more to add. I agree with both of you on this. I come from a more literary fiction background, so I was for a long time attending more conferences that were like AWP that were much more literary focused, which also I think has the same sorts of troubles with diversity as well. And so when I first started attending like more mystery writing conferences with my husband, I was like, oh, these people are so nice, because I was like, so immersed in this literary world and knew all like the snipey things and everything. I'm like, oh, mystery writers are so great and so nice. And then now that I've attended more, I can see, okay, there are definitely different levels of things happening there too. So I think all communities have these issues, and it's important, I think, for people to continue to fight. Even, the hardest thing I think is speaking up against the system, and so I think the more and more people who can chip at that, the better off we'll all be. So.
What about from readers? Have you guys, one thing that I've talked to some other crime writers, especially of color and who are women, has been about sort of this whole trope of the unlikable female protagonist. That when sometimes women are strong, that they're labeled as, bitches. And is that something that you've encountered at all, or is that sort of going away as we have more and more of these strong female protagonists who are solving crimes and kicking butt?
I mean, the idea of the unlikable female character, it, to me, feels sort of like the conversation around what is women's fiction, why is that different from literary fiction? It's like, are unlikable female characters, if they were a man, there are no unlikable male characters, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, it's only women that get this label. Because
unlikable male characters are the anti-heroes, and then they're like badass.
And they're interesting, broody geniuses, or whatever it might be.
Like Walter White or whatever.
Yes, absolutely. And they're kind of celebrated.
Yeah.
But if you have a woman with a strong opinion, or who has anywhere from nuance to her character, or maybe she's even bad, then it's suddenly a conversation about, well, what does this mean? And, and it's just interesting because it's treated so differently. And it is a very popular approach right now to writing, because I think, of course, these women are unlikable in that they're nuanced and they have complexity to their characters, and it's not just a nice person. Nobody wants to read about that. So as you have more women's stories coming forward, there's going to be a lot of unlikable women, because that is what makes a readable and kind of interesting story.
My experience has been more that there are traits that Charlie has that are unlikable, or things that she does that people will say, why did she do that? I don't like that. Especially black women will come up to me and say, why did she do that? We don't like that.
But she also does surprising things, like at the this isn't really a spoiler, I don't think. At the end of the novel, there's a question as to what person is going to join the firm as a partner, and they take somebody who's a woman who's been sort of overlooked, but when you actually look at the traits that she has, is more than qualified. But nobody's thought of it that way because they think of her as somebody who's just, sort of dismissible and disposable. So I think that's really interesting, and I think that can help us to sort of think about sort of power and how those work in those contexts,
I really did want to make an effort to stretch our opinions of who can be in power, who can fight for justice, so without a spoiler, Judy is a 40-year-old Polish woman who is now going to be a private investigator, and she's really good at what she does. She lies very well, which is very important in private investigation. She's a very good social person, which is very good, and she's a technology person because she has a couple of teens at home, so she knows more about technology than anybody else, and I love her.
Yeah. Tara, do you have anything?
No, I mean, I think that I don't know. I've had a couple of I don't read reader reviews that often, but when I've read a few in which, like someone doesn't like Maureen because she's a teenager who does teenagery rebellious things. Other people have appreciated that Allison is a 40-year-old protagonist when they read a lot of younger women in these. So I don't know. I feel like it's more of a taste thing a lot of times too, and so I think. For us, our goal is obviously to create characters who are complex and have interesting aspects and are flawed. And so a lot of times people are going to hone in on whatever they feel like is unlikable or not. And, I don't know that we can dwell on that as writers. We just do what we can do, so.
I did cringe every time Maureen's pilfered some money, even though it was $20.
I know. Yeah.
I know.
And one thing, especially since we're in the Writer Center where, a lot of people come to these events are other writers and aspiring writers, would love to hear a little bit about your publication journey, writing history, how you came to sort of find agents or publishers for your novels. Would love to get a little bit of a perspective on that.
I can start. I joined a romance writers group when Jessica was in that group in 2007. Yeah. And because I really, college made me kind of quit writing creatively. I don't know why that happened, but it really did. And I got to be in my early 20s, and so many things were going great, but the one thing that kind of wasn't was that I just had this like creative hole, and I kind of a longing to kind of get back to some of that. And so I joined, I thought I wanted to write women's fiction, which is something I still enjoy a lot. So I joined Romance Writers of America, which is they're such an incredible organization of just like a lot of really strong, smart, many women. And they had regular sessions out here in Bethesda, and I made a lot of great writing friends. And that just kind of got me started. And so I guess flash forward 10 years. So I wrote 2 books that didn't go anywhere. And then I took a little break, had my son, looked back at what I'd done, which is write 2 books in 10 years, and thought, okay, well, you want to be a commercial thriller writer. That's not a good ratio. We got to do a little better than that. So I kind of rethought my process and got really into structure and wrote this book in about a year, utilized National Novel Writing Month, which is this month, and wrote it a really bad first draft in about a month, and then revised it over a year, and worked with a developmental editor, which is a editor who kind of has the lens of what New York editors will have, and many of them are from there. So I hired that person to kind of help me level up, which I really needed to do. And then, so by the time I got through that year and it was time to query, I had a pretty good list because I'd already queried another book that didn't go anywhere. I probably got at least 150 rejections in that process. Yeah, and so over many years, and revisions and drafts.
And for people who might know, can you tell us about what querying means and what the line querying means?
Yeah, so usually the process is that you usually find an agent, not always, but usually you will find an agent, and that literary agent is kind of the person who's going to represent your work to publishers who will then buy it. And so you maybe will be with a publisher for a few years, maybe longer, but hopefully you'll be with your agent for a very long time, but not always. So you write a query letter, which is sort of a sales pitch. It's kind of got a hook, and then they decide if they connect with your writing style and your kind of vision. And really the most essential piece, which I didn't necessarily know, is that they know how to sell it. Because they could love your book, and that doesn't matter. What they need to know is how to sell your book and have great connections to editors who will buy your book. So I got pretty lucky in that it just was a couple months of querying because I've been through it before, and I kind of had my list narrowed down. And my agent, Victoria Sanders, connected with my work, and she has a couple clients that are just right in this genre, so she had nice editor relationships. So I was really out only on submission for a few weeks, which is very short. So I sold quickly. So, after the beginning, the 10 years part took a while, and then once I kind of found my voice and the other pieces came together.
So I had 2 short story collections published before this novel, both with small presses. I did not have an agent for those, so I just submitted directly to the publisher for both of those books. And I had also had 2 novels that I had written before, one which took like 6 or 7 years and was totally not like anything I should have been writing. It was like over 3 decades, this like historic love story, and I still love that book, but it was just not my strength. So I worked with that forever, and then finally realized that what I really wanted to write was what I love to read, which is mysteries and crime and a little verging on horror, I guess. And so once I feel like I figured out, okay, this is what I want to do, and I had gone through like the querying process with agents before with the novel, and it didn't go anywhere. And I was publishing with small presses, and so I was trying to figure out, like, do I want to do this whole agent thing again? Like, it seems so exhausting, and there's so many steps. It's like you have to query, and then if you get lucky to find an agent, they might not ever sell it, and you might have to keep it. So it just seemed so intimidating, and I almost didn't do it. And I was like, well, you know what? I'll just try one more time. One more time, that'll be fine. And so I also wrote One Night Gone in about a year, which was really fast for me. And then I just wrote about this actually at the Thrill Begins, How It Happened column. And I really credit just my friends in the business with helping me through this process, because instead of querying cold calling agents that I didn't have any relationship with, I really tapped into a lot of my friends who had agents already, whose work I admired or thought might be a good fit. And so my first round of querying was with agents that I kind of had an in with, which is how I ended up finding my agent. So I actually didn't have to. That process wasn't as horrible as I imagined it was going to be. I found an agent in probably about 3 or 4 months, and then once I worked with her on getting the book up to be submitted. That process was also pretty quick. I think it was 3 months before I got my first offer. So I feel like I lucked out because I have a lot of friends who have been looking for agents for years or have been with an agent and not able to sell multiple books. So it's a rough business.
Yeah.
So I have kind of a happy story for those who don't know you can sometimes find success through the non-traditional route. So I wrote the historical fiction book, which was about Negro soldiers in 1943. I did querying. I didn't do a lot of it, maybe a dozen queries. It is a grueling, horrible work. And so I thought, the hell with this. I mean, because I'd written it for 6 years, so I'm going to put it on Amazon, which I did. Just put it out there.
Wow. So, and you gave up after a dozen, which is not,
Yeah, which is
not
really horrible.
advisable.
I'm
Most people
impatient.
go
Okay, I
through
know.
hundreds, before they
My
give
bad. Yes.
But it hurts.
Yeah,
no matter
it hurts. Yes. But I had some success with it, getting awards and things like that. And I actually had a publisher come up to me, and the middle piece here is then after writing that book, it was so grueling, historical fiction, many hours in the Library of Congress, many hours reading people's letters and stuff. It was just a lot of research. So I wanted to write something fun, which is a mystery for me, because I love to read them. So I knocked out a mystery in 4 months. I also just put that on Amazon. Bam, I'm done.
Wow. So just on ebooks?
Yes, just an ebook. And a publisher came up to me and said, I read your book, I like it. Yeah, thanks. Do you think Charlie could be a lesbian? I went, Yeah. And I went to my beta readers who said, we thought she already was a lesbian, so that helped. And so that's how I got my publisher. I'm working right now without an agent, because I haven't had to have one. But next year I do need one because I'm writing a mainstream now, and I'm going to follow, Tara's advice and ask friends about their agents, since I've already got a couple of relationships.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Oh, that's awesome. And also now you have a track record and things like that too. So that's great. Yeah. So I just want to make sure. Okay, so I think we have about 15 minutes left. And so I just wanted to ask you guys to tell us what you're working on now, and then open it up for questions. And if the audience doesn't have a lot of questions, which I'm sort of hoping I have a ton more of mine. So go ahead.
Sure. So I am working on my second novel right now, which is due next September, and I hit the 20K mark on it this week, so I was very excited about that. But it is about I'm kind of exploring the darkness of suburbia in this one. So I have two suburban moms who are very competitive, and they have teenage kids who are very competitive, and dead people happen. So that's all I'm saying.
Wait, actually, and also there was another question that I forgot to ask, which sort of ties into this one, which is what kind of publisher are you working with now, and is that sort of who you're going to be, who you're working on for the next novel?
Right. So When I Gone was published with Graydon House, which is an imprint of Harlequin and HarperCollins. And I love my editor more than anything, and would do anything to stay with her. So she loves me too, apparently. So yes, my second book. Well, actually, my second and my third books, I got a two-book deal that I just signed. So my next book and then the book after that will be with them.
Congratulations, that's awesome.
So I'm forgetting the question for a moment.
Next book and also publisher.
I was forgetting on purpose
and
because
publisher.
I'm so tired. Yes, publisher. So my next book will come out in September. It is also, this is set in Providence, Rhode Island, and that's a pretty prominent part of this book. That's where I live now. And so the next story will also be in Providence. It centers on a woman who gets blackout drunk, and her friend is murdered. Her wallet is found by his body. She has not much memory of that night, and all the kind of privileges and good things in her life slowly crumble around her. And so she starts a vlog to prove herself innocent. So it's one woman's descent into an investigation to prove herself innocent. And hopefully I'll get it done by next Friday, and it'll be out in September.
And publisher?
Yes, I have Thomas & Mercer is my publisher. They have been absolutely fantastic, and they bought 2 books, so this is their second book. And so that's been great, and we'll see about 3 and 4.
And Thomas & Mercer is an Amazon publishing company.
Yeah,
so people might have questions about that.
Yes, absolutely. So Amazon Publishing also does, you can post an ebook and self-publish, but Amazon also created their own publishing house 10 years ago. And so they have different imprints. So mine is the mystery and thriller, but they also have a lot of like women's fiction, there's sci-fi, YA, and they've been doing a big push to actually start, because as you would imagine, they've got a real kind of leg up in the social media marketing pieces. And so they've signed like Patricia Cornwell and Dean Koontz and some people who are, I think, looking to explore in some areas that maybe traditional publishing isn't quite as savvy, because their online marketing is just really cool, and they really support authors and writers. And so I feel like I've been very lucky because thriller readers read a lot of books. Like thriller readers and romance readers generally read the most books. So it's really great to be at a publisher that focuses on just like getting the books out to readers. So that's been a really positive experience. But it's not a traditional publishing per se, but it's been wonderful for me.
I publish with Bywater Books, a small print in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I will do the 5th Charlie Mack book. I'm working on that now. It's out next fall. And then I'm also writing a standalone. I'm spinning off one of the characters to do a DC-based book. And I'm going to find an agent for that one and shop it.
Can't wait. Okay, can't wait for all of these. Do we have any questions? Yes.
should have been more specific. Yeah, giant, right. No, I was at a book reading, and she came up to me after the reading. I was reading the historical fiction, but she came up and said, I read that mystery you wrote. So I was very lucky.
Yes.
Because an agent is going to be able to sell the book to a bigger publishing house. When you work with a small press, as I do, you're everything. I do all my marketing, all my book tours, thank God my publisher has a fabulous cover artist, and so I have great cover art, and that's attached to it. But everything else, I have to do.
Although, even with a large publisher, yeah, I mean, yeah, we pretty much have to do everything ourselves too. So yeah, but it's really, I love that we have this diversity of experiences here, because you're with a big publisher and you have an Amazon publisher, which is, you know, a new kind of publisher, and you have a small press, and now you're, you know, so it's really interesting, and would love to know, yeah, how have you guys felt supported by your publisher, and or is there anything in particular about your own particular type of publisher that you would recommend to the audience, as far as, you know, the pros and cons of that kind of a publisher and that kind of a publication experience?
I mean, I've been with both, so I kind of, and I agree with you that when you're with a small press, you really have to get out there and market your books, but you do have to do that with a big 5 publisher as well, unless you're, I guess, at their top of their list. And even then, I think gone are the days, if they ever were, where you could just write your book and submit it and then let them sell it and you're, you know, done. It's like, you have to come out to these types of events, and you have to be on social media, and you have to, you know, because I think people buy books a lot of times because of the author. They like the author, they like what you're doing, they know you personally, they've seen you at an event, and so I think no matter what route you take, you're going to have to do that, I think. But with small presses, you know, you get more, or at least I got more freedom with things like the cover art, the title. This was One Night Gone was not my title.
Tell us. I love title stories. I love title stories
you have
and
a good
cover art
one.
stories.
You
I
have
have a really good one.
You have a really good one.
Yes, but tell us your title story.
So my title was The Off Season, and that's what I had forever.
I like that
and
title.
my editor read the manuscript based on that title, because she loved that title, and then the sales team got a hold of it, and they were like, no. So came up with like 70 different new titles, like word soup, basically, and then we chose this one, which I'm fine with. I like it. I actually like it now, but it did, like, I was upset. If I had gone with a small press, most likely would have been able to keep my title, most likely would have had a lot of input into the cover art. And then as far as, like, if you're really good at things like hand sales, like at events and things, you usually generally get a bigger cut and more freedom with that when you're with a small press versus a big publisher. But the one thing I have to say is, like, the marketing reach of my publisher now is just so much greater. Like, it's just amazing. Like, I have friends in Michigan sending me pictures of my book in Target, and I was just like, it's amazing, you know. So, you know, that's something that a small press just, they can make the books available so that somebody can come in and special order a book anywhere in the world, but it's really hard to get the books physically on shelves with that.
And I would say, just quickly too, I mean, each publisher will have things they do very well and other things that they just are not a strength. That's everybody. And so I think Thomas and Mercer really knows how to sell books online, and when they are on Goodreads banners, and they're everywhere online. They have a whole team.
They still also sell on, like, Barnes & Noble, right? It's not just Amazon, or do they? Do they?
They are very supportive of, so, like, my book is all over Rhode Island. So if you go to the Warwick Barnes & Noble, I'm there in 2 sections, signed copies and audio. But that's kind of a local connection. So even if you were to go to the Amazon store around the corner, this probably wouldn't be in there. Okay. The model is very online focused, but they're very supportive of authors who don't mind, you know, going to events and selling them that way. And I love that part. I love having events in Rhode Island. It's been so much fun to connect with. I mean, I'm a reader. Like, I love bookstores. And so it's been great to be able to make those relationships, because I hopefully will be writing like for the next, 50 years or whatever. And so it's like, we'll see. And so I want to be friends with bookstores. So even though it's like, oh, you're Amazon, I'm like, yeah, I am. But they're very supportive of me making those connections and those relationships. And, at the end of the day, it's a bookstore. And if there's a reader who wants it, that's kind of what matters.
Yeah.
And I've found that some bookstores, indie bookstores, don't want to deal with Amazon at all. So they won't. They won't put
I've
the
done that
historical
too.
fiction in their
No.
bookstore.
Oh, yeah, I'll
but
bet.
the small press, they love small presses. So
Yeah,
yes, give me your
of
book, they'll
course.
say.
Yeah, that's such a weird dichotomy because, the indie bookstores love small presses, but the indie bookstores really sort of, I feel like, from what I've seen, aren't really into self-published authors also, right?
a little
Is that right?
snobbish about
Yes,
that, yes.
absolutely. Yeah. But given that you're an author who has the small press indie creds, like, I would think that they're more welcoming of you now.
The other thing that my small press has done is built some really good relationships with the library systems, and so I'm in lots of libraries around
Love
the country,
libraries.
and I love libraries.
Love libraries. Any other questions? Yes.
I think no one knows why books sell or how it happens, for sure. But, or maybe you guys disagree. Every time I go to a conference, I'm like looking for answers. There are no answers. So my publisher hired a publicity firm to do, and we got on a call, and they're like, okay, so how involved are you in Bookstagram? And I was like, I'm sorry, you said a word, and what? They're like, Bookstagram, hashtag.
Is that a baby
Bookstagram.
formula?
Yeah, and I was like, what is happening? So Bookstagram, like hashtag Bookstagram, is a whole online community. So of people who love books, and I mean, they're amazing. They love books. They love taking photos of books. They love taking photos of books with coffee cups. They love taking photos of books with them, with their cats, with their dogs, with their pet pigs, with their babies. And it's a celebration of reading is really what it is. People are laughing, but I'm not joking. And some of these accounts have, first of all, 50,000 readers. But more than that, it's not just a commercial that goes to everyone, right? It is people who read within your genre. So it's like a very targeted advertisement. But it's not an advertisement. It's them, and hopefully they're like genuine interest in books and reading. And so I had to quickly learn, to your question, like what that was. And with social media, if you're not authentic, it just smells. Like, you really have to truly care about the community. And so I just jumped in, and Instagram for me had just been a place, because I never filled out my son's baby book. It was just a place where I put baby photos and kind of had something to do to catalog my days. And then suddenly I thought, oh no, I can start thinking about reading in that way. So for me, it just was an opportunity to discover a new community, and really not just post like, buy my book, because nobody wants that, but to actually be like, I love this book and I love that book, and have contests and connect with people. So that's what it was for me.
I've had some success with Twitter. I'm on Instagram, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing there, But with Twitter, I've had people come up. I'm talking to a producer about a TV series for Charlie Mack, because she saw.
I think
the
that's a
picture
brilliant
on
idea.
Twitter.
I want that TV series right now. Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm the opposite of you. I don't understand Twitter at all.
I don't
And,
either.
yeah. Sarah, do you-
I also had the Bookstagram. My publisher was really pushing Bookstagram, and so she sent my book out everywhere, and I started getting these notifications, pictures of my book with coffee cups, with all kinds of crazy things. It was awesome. And this one, to talk about the dedication of these people, just last week, this one Bookstagram person read my book, and then she cast it, like with actresses and actors, both time periods. She did the 2015 and the 1985. And she like made this beautiful like grid of all the people and who the characters would be, and she posted it up there with a review of my book. I mean, it's like they get these, you know, a lot of times they'll get the books for free, but they are so like devoted to like sharing these, and it's amazing.
They're
It's awesome.
crazy. So they're crazy. They really are.
Good.
I mean, so Miracle Creek, it came out like April 16th or whatever, and I took off 3 days or something because the day after it came out, I went to Austin for my first leg of my book tour, and it was my 50th birthday. So my husband came with me, and we were like, okay, we're just gonna spend 2 days in Austin, like nothing. And I had missed all these stories and things like that. And so there were all these stories. So Miracle Creek is actual, you know, it's like a creek. So there were pictures of my book, by a creek, in a creek, on a rock on a creek. And then my book starts with an explosion and fire, and which kills some people, so it's a murder. Anyway, so there are now over a dozen pictures of these bookstagrammers who have taken a picture of my book in a fire, like seriously. And then they're like, yes, I needed my husband's help with this to make sure that I wouldn't burn my arm. Like, you're just like, what is wrong with you people? All right, one final question. I think we had, yes.
Yeah, so how I believe it works most of the time is your publicist or someone at your publishing house sends review copies out everywhere, from the New York Times to bloggers or whatever. But we don't have any say. I mean, I guess we have input into like if there are news outlets, like local news outlets or places that we have connections to that the publicist wants to know about. But we don't have any say, obviously, in who reviews what. And as far as like how much of a difference that makes, I honestly don't know. I really don't. I mean, I guess you could all ask yourselves, like, do you read book reviews and buy books based on that? Or, you know, if you see it on a picture of it on. So I don't know. I mean, I really, it's all a mystery to me how that all works. I mean, it's really awesome for me if I see a review of my book, but beyond that, like, I don't know how much it influences readers.
I saw a presentation by an author named Mark Dawson who sold millions of copies self-published, and in his analysis, he believes, because self-publishing uses a lot of metrics, it's a really smart area of publishing, that a person needs to see a book at least 8 times to buy it. So it's a New York Times review maybe, which is a really big deal. I mean, Angie was in the New York Times. I guess that's a big deal. But whether that's a huge spike that you would hope, maybe not. But if they see the New York Times and then they just see something on Instagram and then maybe their friend says they liked it or they hear something on the like it can sometimes be like a combination of things. And that's why your first few weeks of debut, or when you come out, your book comes out, matter so much, is because that's when everyone's talking about it. So that's probably the highest likelihood that they'll hear it that 8, 9, 10 times they need to actually buy it.
And I believe in this long tail theory of marketing. So she's right about the impressions, but once you get your book out there, it could be years before another outlet picks it up, especially with streaming and stuff like that right now. So I think it depends on where it's reviewed, like an NPR morning edition mention of your book, Angie Kim, will get your book sold.
Yeah, and I will say, the 2 things where I saw measurable spikes in my sales are NPR, All Things Considered, and that was, I think it was rush hour, like on Friday, driving time. And then, and that was even before the publication. So all people could do was pre-order it, and even on the pre-order, it
They
was
were
like
stuck
a
in
huge.
traffic.
Yeah, it was like a huge. Yeah, right. So it was like a huge spike. No, it didn't come through until like later that night. But still, not immediately. But still, and that's the great thing about. Well, that's the good thing and the bad thing about these Amazon rankings and things is that you can really like track hour by hour how your book is doing. And then the other one is the New York Times book review. Like that just. It like first when it came on online, and then another one like a week later when there was the print review. Those were big spikes. But other than that, not really anything. Yeah.
I can track some of my sales because the platform Amazon has. And one really interesting spike I saw was I had tweeted right around when my book came out, like a picture of me wearing my son and kind of talking about my journey. And it just, for me, it was a lot of people saw it. Like the impressions number was something like 25,000, which that's a lot. I don't have a big.
That's huge.
That's
yeah.
a lot of people because people are like retweeting it, and it was.
Absolutely.
And that's like something you can't account for. You have no idea if something is going to connect.
Yeah.
And you maybe hope, but I think you just try to be true and like really be as authentic as you can. And if people connect with it, like then that's great. But you just don't have any control, unfortunately, of whether that happens.
And there's one more piece of data that I always tell people about in the mystery cozy world. If you have a cat on your cover, it sells more books.
Yeah. Cats and dogs in general, right? Well, thank you guys for joining us today. Thank you to the audience. Thank you.